Picture this, the dazzling fashion scene of Paris. And now, picture peaceful, quiet Cape Cod.
Quite a contrast, huh?
That's the life Christa Worthington chose, former fashion writer. Decided to make Truro, Massachusetts, her new home.
Sought a quieter life, maybe.
But on January 6th, 2002, it all changed. Brutally murdered in her own home.
Leaving behind a 2-year-old daughter.
A case that shocked the nation.
And today we're diving deep into it, using all the sources you've given us.
To try and understand what happened to Christa Worthington.
What really stands out to me is that contrast. She lived this glamorous, fast-paced life.
Yeah, man.
Chooses Truro, a place known for its tranquility. Almost isolated, you could say.
It makes you wonder, what was she looking for?
What made her make such a drastic change?
Right. Was she really just searching for peace and quiet?
Maybe she just wanted a fresh start?
A simpler life.
Or could there be something more?
Something she was running from, perhaps.
The report suggests that even in Truro, life wasn't exactly simple for her.
Ah, okay. Tell me more.
Seems she had connections with several men in town.
I see where this is going. Small town, everyone knows everyone.
Exactly. One of those men was Tim Arnold.
The one who found her body.
Yes. And it gets even more complicated. His DNA was at the scene.
So he's immediately a suspect.
Right. But he claimed he was just returning a flashlight, thought she'd just fallen.
But his DNA was there, on the blanket covering her body.
That raises some serious questions, no doubt.
But DNA evidence back then wasn't as advanced as it is today, right?
Exactly. It was 2002. Think of it like those old GPS systems. You know, the kind that would just point you in the right general direction.
But not always get you exactly where you needed to be.
Precisely. So while Arnold's DNA is significant...
It doesn't automatically mean he's guilty.
Correct. Investigators had to explore other possibilities. Other reasons his DNA might be there.
Okay, that makes sense. So, if we can't jump to conclusions about Arnold, what about the other man, Tony Jacket, Ava's father?
Yes, Jacket. The sources say they had a brief affair.
But the details are a bit unclear.
A bit murky, yes. So, was there any bad blood between them?
Any reason for Jacket to want to harm Christa?
Those are key questions.
Especially in a small town like Truro. Like you said, everyone knows everyone's business.
Precisely. And the dynamics of relationships take on a whole new meaning in that kind of environment.
Even fleeting relationships.
Even those. So being Ava's father in a town like Truro, it meant more than just a biological connection.
It put him right in the middle of this intricate web of relationships.
Where those ties matter deeply. Almost as if everyone is invested in the outcome, even if they weren't directly involved.
Wow. So you're saying that these unspoken rules of small-town life, they might have actually influenced the investigation itself.
Possibly. Did people hesitate to come forward with information? Were they protecting their own? Even if it meant delaying justice.
Fascinating. So we have these two key figures, Arnold with his DNA at the scene, and Jacket, Ava's father, both tangled in this web of relationships in Truro.
And let's not forget the third person who gets drawn into the investigation.
Chiamato, right, Arnold's son-in-law.
That's right. Though it's not entirely clear from the sources why he became involved. It seems the initial focus was on those closest to Christa, understandably, of course.
Yeah, typical in a homicide investigation.
But you have to wonder if that laser focus maybe created a kind of tunnel vision.
Tunnel vision, meaning...
You're so fixated on one thing, you might miss other crucial details.
Got it. But wouldn't a small town where gossip spreads so easily also be an advantage? Someone must have seen or heard something.
That's the paradox, isn't it? The closeness of a small town could either help or hinder the search for the truth.
So while investigators were trying to make sense of these relationships, how did Truro, the town itself, react to this shocking crime? I mean, their last murder was over 30 years ago. This wasn't just another news story, was it? This was like a crack in the foundation of their peaceful existence.
Absolutely. This crime completely shattered their sense of security.
Their sense of peace.
Imagine living in a place where the biggest event was the annual clam bake, and then, suddenly,
you have this brutal, unsolved murder.
It changes everything. Makes you question everything, even your neighbors.
Unnerving.
It truly is. Yeah, that feeling of safety, gone. That trust you have in your neighbors, it's just shattered.
And it wasn't just the immediate shock. Weeks turned into months. Months into years.
Yeah.
And no arrest. That must have been incredibly difficult for the people of Truro.
It was like a constant weight on their shoulders. Just this feeling of anxiety, never knowing who was responsible.
The reports mentioned a shift in Truro. Almost like a sense of paranoia, people looking over their shoulders, not knowing who to trust.
Exactly. Some people probably just withdrew, others became suspicious. That's the thing about these unsolved crimes.
They linger. They don't end at the crime scene.
Right. They affect everyone. And for Chris's family, I can't even imagine.
Grieving the loss, but never knowing who took her from them. It's heartbreaking.
And that search for justice becomes part of the grieving process, a way to honor her memory, to try and find meaning in this senseless tragedy.
And in this case, the investigation just seemed to hit dead end after dead end.
Remember, this was 2002. We didn't have the same forensic tools we have today.
You mentioned the DNA technology earlier, but didn't they eventually get a break in the case? In 2005?
Yes. A DNA match from the crime scene.
Finally.
Finally. It matched an unknown male profile.
So maybe the killer wasn't someone from Truro after all.
That was a real possibility, someone just passing through.
A tourist? Maybe. Wow. Think about how much that would have changed the investigation.
Absolutely. Trying to track down someone with no obvious connection to Christa or Truro.
Like finding a needle in a haystack?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it also added a new layer of intrigue to the case.
Right. Was it someone who had just been driving through Cape Cod?
Or maybe someone from Christa's past.
Someone from her fashion days.
It must have sent shockwaves through the town.
It's almost like the mystery of Christa's life is reflected in the mystery of her death.
It's not just a small-town murder anymore. It's a puzzle with pieces scattered all over the place.
Did the DNA match lead to the killer?
That we don't know.
Oh.
The sources don't say.
So we still don't know if Christa's murderer was ever brought to justice.
Not from these sources. But before we get too caught up in that, I think it's important to remember Ava.
Christa's daughter.
Yes. It's easy to focus on the investigation, the mystery. But Ava's story reminds us that this is real life. Real people were affected.
She was only 2 years old when her mother was murdered.
Unimaginable to witness something like that.
To lose your mother at such a young age.
Yeah.
And in such a horrible way.
And think about the impact that would have on her as she grew up.
Without a mother. Knowing her life was forever changed by this act of violence.
Did the sources mention anything about Ava's life after the murder?
Not really, but I think it's safe to say that this experience shaped her in profound ways.
Of course. It makes you wonder about the support she received.
How the community rallied around her. How she coped with the grief and loss.
All important questions.
Questions that go beyond the scope of our deep dive today.
But they highlight the ripple effects of a crime like this. It's not just the victim who suffers.
Entire families, communities, even generations.
It's a tragedy on so many levels.
So here we are, left with this unsolved mystery. A case that just defies easy answers. Potential suspects.
A town trying to cope.
And a young girl whose life was irrevocably changed.
It's a powerful reminder, isn't it, that even in the most peaceful places,
darkness can exist. It really makes you think, doesn't it? Started out picturing this peaceful Cape Cod town.
And we end up with a murder that just seems impossible to solve.
And the impact it had. Truro will never be the same.
I think this case really challenges how we view small-town life.
How so?
We tend to think of these places as safe, charming, quaint, everyone knows each other.
Tight-knit communities.
Right. But then a case like this comes along, and it exposes a whole other side.
The secrets lurking beneath the surface.
Exactly. The complicated relationships.
It makes you realize that every town has its dark side.
No matter how perfect it might seem.
It's a sobering thought. And what's even more unsettling, even with that DNA breakthrough in 2005,
we still don't have a definitive answer.
Christa's murder remains unsolved.
And that's what makes these unsolved mysteries so fascinating, right?
They grab hold of you, make you question everything.
We're left with so many unanswered questions.
Was the killer someone from Truro?
Someone who knew Christa. Or just someone passing through.
Someone who disappeared without a trace.
We just don't know.
This deep dive has taken us through so many twists and turns.
Tried to make sense of it all.
But we still end up with more questions than answers.
Will we ever know the truth? Will justice ever be served?
Especially for Ava.
To grow up without a mother. It's hard to comprehend.
This case, it's not just about a murder. It's about human nature.
About the fragility of life.
And about the constant pursuit of truth and justice.
It reminds us that evil can exist anywhere, even in the most beautiful places.
And that sometimes the most disturbing truths are hidden in plain sight. So what can our listeners take away from this deep dive?
Well, first and foremost, it's a reminder that we should never take our safety for granted.
No matter where we live.
And it's a story that highlights the complexities of human relationships.
the secrets we keep,
The lies we tell.
the lengths we'll go to protect ourselves.
And ultimately, it's a story about the enduring power of truth, the belief that justice will eventually prevail, even if it takes years, decades, or even longer. We owe it to Christa, to Ava, and to ourselves to never give up on the search for answers.
I think that's a great note to end on. If this deep dive has piqued your interest, I encourage you to delve deeper into the resources we've provided. There are documentaries, articles, podcasts, all offering different perspectives on the case. But as you explore, always remember the human cost, the lives that were forever changed by this tragedy, and keep those unanswered questions in mind. Maybe you'll find something we missed, a clue that could finally bring closure to this case.
That's the beauty of these deep dives. We're all in this together, searching for answers, trying to make sense of the world around us.
And sometimes, the most important discoveries are the ones we make ourselves. So, keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, never stop seeking the truth.